It goes to show that regardless of what field you're doing, there is an ability to make money. The question is, how can you convince your parents that, right? Again, it goes back to what I said. The goal of college isn't for you to become an expert in this field. It's for you to show employers that for 4 years you showed up and you did your thing.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Unit E channel, and this is another episode of the Outstanding Youths interview. And today we are joined by a rising sophomore at Yale. This is the second guest that we have had on this show that is a student at Yale, and welcome Mr. LaShore to the podcast.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Super excited. Margaret, the first time I met Margaret was actually just a few weeks ago in Beijing, China. She was one of my assistant directors in the World Health Organization, and she asked me to be part of the podcast, and I said, of course. Margaret's an amazing person, and I'm sure her podcast and her followers will be just as amazing.
Thank you for that. Okay, so why did you choose a combination of biomedical engineering and economics as your major, and like how do you plan on combining those two realms of knowledge in the future for your career?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the story that I tell a lot of people, because what you're asking is something that a lot of people, like employers, have asked me, is growing up, I kind of bounced back and forth between a lot of places. So I grew up and I was born in Houston, Texas, but I visited Malaysia and kind of lived there for many short periods of time. And I did that roughly 4 times until the age of 12 when I finally settled and stayed in the US. When you bounce back and forth between a place so many times, no less two very different countries, you appreciate certain constants in your life. For me, that was like, for example, healthcare. No matter what language I speak, no matter what country I'm in, healthcare will always be important. Finance will always be important. Our ideology, whether that's religion or your spiritual beliefs, will always be important. And so when I finally settled in the US, I knew that when I pursued higher education, I wanted to pursue those constants, understand why it's important to us and how we can capitalize off of it. So the two that I chose to pursue was healthcare, but also finance, right? So biomedical engineering and economics, the way that I link those two is I want to be able to solve the healthcare sector's problems, but from a financial perspective. And so for me, that's been looking at like life science startups and seeing how we can support them. But for others, that can be examining the insurance industry and seeing how finance can help. But that's kind of the reason behind me majoring in biomedical engineering and economics.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so I know that you also have your own startup project, and that's really cool because I'm also running my own sustainable fashion business. And like right now, I think it's really popular for a lot of teens and a lot of high schoolers to start their own projects based on what they want to do in the future. And so, can you maybe tell us a bit about like why you started it and how it will help you in the future in terms of your career?
Sure, absolutely. So the startup I'm part of is called Control Trial. And what we do, well, I guess I'll give you the brief backstory first. Going to Yale, because I only have finished my first year, around 4 weeks in, I applied for a fellowship called the Yale Helix Fellowship. And we take roughly, I want to say 20 to 25 undergraduate students at Yale to be part of the program. And we help biotech startups in the New Haven area. So Yale is based in New Haven. We help roughly 25 students through the fellowship. Or excuse me, we take 25 students to the fellowship. And what we do is we accelerate and incubate these companies as best we can. So we'll at the same time that we take 25 students, we take roughly 6 startups in biotech. And what we do is we pair students up to these companies to help them with everything from finding funding to forming research to even creating the tech behind the companies. And so I, as well as 4 other students, were assigned to Control Trial. Now, what the company actually does is we use artificial intelligence and machine learning to pair patients to clinical trials automatically. So the way in the United States and honestly the rest of the world that it works is if you want to be part of a clinical trial, right? If you want access to this new drug, new therapeutic, you have to go through your doctor, and your doctor has to manually go through every clinical trial and see if you're eligible for it. But the problem is that clinical trial criteria changes at very fast rates, right? It's not like it's the same. And the other thing is that there's so many clinical trials going on, right? It's hard to make one doctor be able to constantly know who's eligible for a clinical trial and which ones are open and which ones are closed. So what we have done at Control Trial is create an algorithm that standardizes patient health data, standardizes clinical trial criteria, and from there it can match patients up to clinical trials automatically. Using our algorithm and using our process, we've roughly 5x the amount of patients that enroll in clinical trials. And this past year, we did trials with Pfizer, with Eli Lilly, which are massive pharmaceutical companies, and the results have tracked. That 5x number has been the same case for them. Kind of a number that we're very proud of is this past year, because of the success we had, we received $1 million grant from Eli Lilly, and yeah, we're continuing to fire on all cylinders. When I go back in just a few weeks, we'll be having like a few developmental meetings to see where we want to take our startup. And yeah, very very excited.
Wow, that's a very amazing story. And I think like when I started my project, I thought fashion was something that might like not be the most money making industry in the short term, because there are so many companies out there that's like doing essentially the same thing, and some might even have the same selling points, and some might share the share the same mission and the objective as you. And so I think it's really hard for like a student to know how to make their own project different. Your startup is obviously really amazing. And I think for me, when I started my own business, one thing that I was struggling with was trying to differentiate myself from the other projects and from the other companies that are essentially doing the same thing as my project. And I think it's
Mhm.
kind of hard for us as students, as consumers, to sometimes tell the difference and to think in the minds of business people and also in terms of consumers, because I think that we always have this bias of thinking that our project is special and that more people should look at what we're doing. And so like what do you think is something that more teen entrepreneurs— Sorry, guys, it cut off there. But the question was, how do teen entrepreneurs differentiate their projects from the already existing projects out there in society, and how do we make our project shine? That was the question. And sorry for the poor quality of the video recording. However, this was an interview that was being hosted online, so that was essentially the best we can do, and it was across different countries, different time zones, so there were definitely a lot of errors here and there, but we did it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Thanks.
Well, what I would say is the as great as my startup is, as awesome as much as I love Control Trial, there are other companies that are doing what we're doing, right? But where we differentiate ourselves is in these. It sounds like tiny things, but they're really big ideas. Like what our goal for Control Trial is, right? There may be another company that uses a slightly different technology, but is still helping the same subset of people. But we differentiate over what our goal is. For example, at Control Trial, our goal is to become the standard for clinical trial practices, where we are working with hospital systems individually and then eventually have those work together. Other companies, that's not the case. Where I'm not going to name specific competitors, but others, they hope to be a premium product. They hope to be a luxury that only certain hospitals can boast that they have, right? It builds power to it, builds exclusivity. And so that's where we differ. To answer your question of how do students be different themselves, well, you need to ask the same question. What's your goal, right? Let's say, for example, for your brand, Eco Apparel, which, by the way, everybody please go support. It's an awesome brand. Um, if your goal for Eco Apparel is to, just be a niche brand, help a few people and maybe be a luxury product, then market yourself as such, right? You don't need to have some massive campaign. You don't need to, make your products very low cost or whatever. But if your goal is to make eco apparel the standard, where every single person is using it, every single person wants to do it, you got to change your marketing, you got to change your price point, you got to look into manufacturing, things like that, right? So I think so often people come up with solutions instead of looking at problems. What that means is when you're creating something, a product or a company, you should be creating it to solve a problem. What some people, especially those who are trying to go to top universities, right? Because when you're applying to top universities, you know you need something different. So what a lot of students try to do is they just try to come up with something and then they try to find the problem that makes sense for it. But that's backwards. Find a problem first, come up with a solution, but then along the way, do what I just talked about of know what are you trying to do here? What's your goal? Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's an amazing answer because I think like I've watched so many videos on like how to start your business, how I moved my business from 0 to 100 million. Like all of those videos they're talking about like how they used the investors' money to like to expand on what they're doing. But I think one video that really made sense to me was like keep asking yourself like what is your problem and like what problem do you think is the biggest when it comes to the industry that you're trying like that you're in. And I think like for me in terms of fashion, like I keep forgetting that my biggest problem when it comes to like selling clothes and like when it comes to me buying clothes was like trying it on and like trying to see if it fits my style and like that is the biggest problem, but I keep forgetting that. So every time I'm like trying to put out this new product, I market is I market it as like a competitor's product. Like if I see a competitor doing like a similar product or they said something that made them go viral, I might follow that path and forget why I'm actually doing this. And so I think there's this Chinese saying called 不忘初心, and I think yeah that is the key when like starting your own company. And so you said that in the future you want to focus on the Chinese market in terms of your and so what do you think about China is making it have the greatest potential of development in the future?
Sure, yeah. So I guess I'll talk about the first thing that you said of, my focus. Uh, my my career goal and what I want to pursue is a career in finance. What that means is, investing, what we call capital markets, financial markets. And I won't go and explain all those terms, but that's really like those buzzwords are what I want to pursue. My interest lies in Asia Pacific markets. So there's different regions of the world, right? North America, South America, and then there's a region called Asia Pacific, as well as others, and that kind of includes places like China, right? The reason I've been interested in Asia Pacific is because I feel it functions so differently than the rest of the world. Everybody talks about North America. Everybody talks about Europe. These are massive areas. To be quite frank, honestly, more profitable areas than Asia Pacific at times. But where it differs is the rate that it's growing, and then also just the way that it functions. Right in North America and Europe, these are large democracies. They're very, very, have strong democratic powers and strong democracies that make it very easy to see how a company grows, right? There's not too many crazy things per se or unpredictable things that can happen. But in uh, Asia, there are so many different types of geopolitical rule, right? For example, China being a communist country, but then when you go over to Malaysia, it being a democracy on paper, but it being more of a constitutional monarchy, right? There's so many different powers that come into play that when you lump it into one region and these countries work together, it makes it very interesting to study and see what happens. That's like the technical answer that I'll give you. The more interesting answer and fun answer It's just that I feel that Asia is so rich in ideas and diversity of ideas. And I'm sure you can get that in other regions. I just haven't seen it as much. So I think it's a very exciting time for young entrepreneurs in Asia Pacific. And so that's why I'm interested in those markets. So it's a mix of rich old history, right? I mean, China itself goes back hundreds of thousands of years of finance, but with that young spirit of entrepreneurs and all the other stuff that I mentioned. Um,
Oh,
the last thing I'll say, I didn't mean to cut you off. The last thing I'll say is I don't exactly know if China and Asia Pacific will be the greatest or the best per se. I mean, that's very up to who you're asking, but I do know it's going to be an interesting ride, and that's why I want to pursue it.
think your answer really makes me think about one big stress that a lot of Chinese parents have when they send their kids abroad for high school or for college, and they might think that if I make my kids stay in the US, if I make my kids stay at the place where they went to college, they might end up making more money because they can like get, for example, like a green card if they live there long enough, and they can um, make more money essentially in the long term and have a more stable job. But I think like that just kind of causes more stress, and I think a lot more students get lost in the process because I have a lot of friends back in Beijing who are going to American high schools for ninth grade, and they're it's not necessarily that their parents are forcing them to do that. It's that those agencies, um, like those college application consulting agencies, they tell those kids, oh, you should go to one of those American high schools so that you can have a better chance of going to a better college, and then you can like stay in the US or stay wherever you go in the future for your career. And I think that might be like a very twisted perception of the opportunities that we have, because just like you have said, um like the market demand and the need in different places are very different. And so I think no matter where people go for their career in the future, they some might think that staying at a place where it's very where the market and where the industries are very mature, but like going somewhere that is quite new might be a greater risk. But I think that if a student is very sure of what they want to do in the future, they might just follow what their passion tells them. And so I think that leads to our next question of college applications, because that's what stresses every parent out nowadays. And so, because you got into one of the top Ivy Leagues, what was it that you did in high school that you believe helped you out the most um, for your college application? Or um, was your high school life really revolved around thinking about that final college application, or were you just doing whatever like you're interested in that moment?
Yeah, great question. Um, so to be honest, yeah, it very much was, and I think that's an answer that people don't like to hear. The truth. So for me personally, I was somebody that was just obsessed with college admissions. And I say obsessed about college admissions, like yes, I wanted to get into big schools like Yale, like Stanford, etc. But just the process of applying to college and the fact that like in the US there's I think some 3,000 universities, for whatever reason that just fascinated me. That there was like 3,000 different schools I can go to. And for whatever reason, there are certain ones that are better than others, objectively better than others, that I'd want to go to. It was so interesting to me. My favorite thing to do in my free time was I don't know if you guys seen on YouTube, but there's these college decision reaction videos where it's people
Oh yeah.
reacting to yeah. I love those videos. I would watch as many as I could. And this was back when I was like 13, 14, so not even close to applying to college. So all to say, I was obsessed, I was hungry, I really loved the process. When I um when I went into high school and I knew like, okay, I need to start preparing for getting my application ready, getting my ECs ready. I also realized how little I really knew about the process. That goes to say how little everybody knows. So anybody who thinks that they know the college admissions process through and through is lying to you. It's not true. Even an admissions officer who works for the school doesn't know the process entirely themselves because everybody's a little bit different. Every admissions officer is looking for something a little bit different. Every student provides something a little bit different. But that being said, after watching all of these admitted student videos and all these things, I came to a few understandings that I think are pretty undeniably true. Number one, it vastly depends on your background, right? So take that as your level of education, your family's level of education, your income, right? Whether you're international or not, those are huge factors. And then I think the second big thing was admissions in the US is extremely holistic. What that means is no one factor is most important, right? Your grades aren't everything. Your extracurriculars aren't everything. It's the package and story that you're selling together. And so, knowing these two things, I decided that in addition to having things like, good grades, good SATs, good standardized test scores, that was a given, right? Every student who was going to get into these schools had those things. So I decided that, okay, I'm going to get those out of the way as early as possible and then focus on the rest of my application. So whereas most students ended up taking the SAT in their 11th and 12th grade year, I took mine in my ninth and 10th grade year. Once I got a good score, I was done, never took it again. Same thing for my grades. I didn't do just good enough. I did well, but I was never number one in my school. I was never like the top student. I was ranked high, and that was good enough for me. Good enough as in like the difference between where I was at and being number one wasn't going to have made a significant impact on me. So then answering your question of what did I do, right? That's the big question. I knew that I was passionate about biomedical engineering, right? So creating these medical devices, using robotics and mechatronics to solve medical problems. I knew I just loved it for whatever reason. But I also knew that I needed to do something a little bit different. What I mean by that is when you're applying to college, you have something called a spike. What that means is you have these collection of interests that you've accrued throughout your college, through your high school career, and rather than just leaving it at these separate interests, there's a way to combine all of them into this nice little spike. And at the very top is your application, right? So you're taking all of your interests, you're fitting it together in a nice story, putting a ribbon on it, and that is what you're presenting to the admissions committee. Right? So instead of saying that, Margaret is someone who likes fashion, she likes business, she likes media, you can sell that together as maybe Margaret likes to sell fashion media. She wants to pursue fashion technology, something like that, right? You're selling it in one package. So for me, I knew that I loved biomedical engineering, but I also knew I loved the humanity and policy side of things. It fascinated me. What I should have also said when you asked me earlier of like what my aspirations were with, I want to work in finance to make my money to do all these things, but my end goal is to work in a position of like political power, right? So like the World Health Organization, I actually wrote about that in my college application where I one day want to work for the World Health Organization. So anyway, that's to say like those were my buckets of interest: policy, biomedical engineering, humanities, stuff like that. Well, the way that I fit all of that together was I found a need in developing countries for ideological based innovation. What that means, it's a fancy way of saying in science, it's not just about innovating and creating the most breakthrough technology, it's also about adapting it to the users who use it. Right? For example, in the nation of Belize, there is a collection, or collection's the wrong word, there's a community of indigenous people known as the Garifuna. The Garifuna have one of the highest prevalence of diabetes in the world. Over 50% of the population has diabetes. And even though there's so many technologies, so many therapeutics that can be used for diabetes, they oftentimes don't use it because it goes against their spiritual beliefs, it goes against their ideology. So think about that. We have some of the best technology. When I say we, I mean like as a humankind, we have some of the most breakthrough technology that you and I can use if we need it. Even though it's breakthrough, even though we know it can help people, some people still choose to not do it because it violates their spiritual beliefs. That's where my interest lied. The fact that disconnect, right? So what I did throughout my college application and what I did in like the later half of my high school career was find activities that could pursue that interest. So one of the things I did was in 2023, my junior year, I was named as the youth ambassador to Belize. What that meant was the U.S. Department of State appointed myself and a few other students to go to Belize for 3 weeks, and then after going to Belize, we would solve a problem in our community. What I did was myself and my friend Justin, we decided to solve a problem in Belize instead of our own local Houston community, just because it worked out that way. It was what interested us. So what we did was we created a project where we designed healthcare and first aid kits, but we did so with the input of the people that were helping. So rather than just throwing together bandages and medicine and whatever, we worked with researchers and we worked with the actual Garifuna and Belizean community to understand what were their beliefs, what were their understandings, their misunderstandings, and how can we solve that, right? So we're encompassing all of it together, tying it together in this really nice story, and literally giving it to them. And so that was what I did during my college application process was I told the stories. I explained how all of these fit together and how my interest was this nice niche little thing. And I sold it as best as I could. When I say sell it, I mean, I talked about the activities that I did. I talked about why I wanted to do it, how it made sense, how it solved what I was saying it was going to solve. And yeah, submitted the application. I applied to roughly 23 schools. I applied early to Stanford. I unfortunately got deferred from Stanford. But then after I got deferred from Stanford, it was a little bit of a wake up call. What I did was I applied to many safety schools. And then but I only applied to target, like reach schools that I would really see myself at. So that meant that even there were some schools that would have been amazing, right? For example, being an engineering student, MIT is unequivocally one of the best schools for engineering. I didn't apply to MIT because I couldn't see myself there. It just wasn't a school that for me. Same thing with Princeton. Princeton's a phenomenal school, but I couldn't see myself there, so I didn't apply. So in total, came out to 23 schools. I ended up getting a likely letter to Columbia, which basically it's a very special form of admission that a handful of students are given. I received a full ride to Johns Hopkins for biomedical engineering. Johns Hopkins is obviously a very revered medical university. And then I got into other great schools like Vanderbilt, Duke, UC Berkeley, UCLA, so on and so forth. And at the top of all of it was Yale. And I felt that Yale was, I'll never forget. I remember after submitting all my applications in like early January, I was talking to my parents and I said, the one school where when I was writing about it, I just truly felt most connected to was Yale. And it reflected in the essays that I wrote, right? These admissions officers read thousands and thousands of essays, literally. And so they can tell when someone's being genuine and when someone's not. And so I toured the schools, I decided on Yale, and it's one of the best decisions I've made since. Yeah, I know I kind of went on a tangent there, but yeah.
So I think your answer really shows on when someone is really passionate about on what they're doing and how they do it and like the 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 best results that will lead to. However, I think a lot of parents they put the pressure on their child on like they have to develop an interest in one of those like uh realms that would bring them a high salary in the future. And so I think a lot of kids like they might be really talented and they might be really good at, for example, stuff related to engineering or like finance or med. Like they might be really good at it, but it's not what they want to do. And like a lot of people around me, especially at my current school right now in Fuhai, like a lot of kids they want to go into med, and that's because, well, realistically, it's because in Hong Kong, which is very near Fuhai, like Hong Kong just opened this new policy of that if you go to a university in Hong Kong, and your major is like something related to med, or whether that is like dermatology or like just realm in the med field, you can get a full scholarship, and the government also has like uh those policies that lean towards people who are in the med realm in Hong Kong. And so I think like a lot of people, they value this financial value that their career gives them, but they don't really value what they actually want. And so I think a lot of friends that I have, like, they're really stressed about applying to college and also applying to one of those American high schools. And so I think like it will be interesting to hear your thoughts on like how much college plays a role in the career of someone, because to me, like, it's important, but it's not one of the main factors that will lead to true success. What do you think?
Yeah, I think everything you said is very interesting. A very quick side note before I give the answer is the policy that you talked about in Hong Kong is actually something that I learned. I won't say I didn't create it. That's definitely not what happened. But myself and a few students from Yale were able to kind of almost advise on it. I want to say and give insight into it. In my first semester at Yale, I was lucky enough to be work with a group called the Hong Kong Biomed Enotech Association. And that is basically the government biotech arm of the Hong Kong government. And what they did was they hired a few of us Yale students as a consulting group, and we were able to advise them on how to increase their biotech sector without the influence of China. Because obviously, most of biotech innovation and pharma stuff that happens in Hong Kong is tied to China, tied to the mainland. And one of the things that they do is, you're absolutely right, they offer full rides to students who want to major in STEM, provided that they come to a Hong Kong university. Other things that they do is, in order to incentivize startups, is they say, okay, if you bring your startup to Hong Kong, we'll give you guys grants, we'll give you guys maybe free access to some of the medical facilities, things like that. So it's really interesting that you brought that up. It's very now answering your question. I'll give you two kind of extreme sides of the same coin, right? And it's funny you say this because I was just having a conversation with my dad about this. The goal of college isn't for you to develop this incredible knowledge in one field, right? The goal of college and getting a degree is to show your employer that for 4 years, you woke up every day, you went to class, you took a test, you survived, right? Fundamentally, a college degree shows that you had the discipline to be in one place for 4 years to show that you know what you're doing, or at least you're trying to know what you do, and that you were able to live and you were able to survive for 4 years. That's what a college degree shows, right? What many people don't realize is when you actually go into the corporate world and you get a job after college, there's going to be so many things that you don't know, right? So many things that you didn't learn during university. Even if you're going to these top schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge, you're not going to learn every facet of what you're doing in those 4 years. You're just not, because every company functions differently. Every company has a different mission, right? We talked about that earlier. So you're not going to know everything. Many of the stuff you will learn on the job. That's just the honest truth, right? And so that's the first answer that I'll give you. That the goal of college isn't for you to learn everything about this. When you talk about the other thing you talked about is like these high paying fields, right? My personal philosophy is that in any field that you pursue, there is an ability to make money. And I would even go so far as to say an ability to be wealthy or be rich, be very financially successful. Some fields are harder than others, though, right? For example, if you're pursuing music, I played the cello since I was 6 years old. Music was a huge part of my life. It's objectively extremely difficult to become that upper echelon of financial success in music, but it's not nearly impossible, right? It used to be where to be rich in music, you'd have to be the best player, period. Best player ever. You had to be on tour, orchestras would hire you, etc. But now that's not the case. Some of the richest musicians are people who post on YouTube people who have podcasts, though people who have like funny content, right? There's these group of violinists called Two Set Violin. They make more than almost any major musician because they make content that people enjoy, that's fun and lively, right? But they're not the best musicians. So it goes to show that regardless of what field you're doing, there is an ability to make money. The question is, how can you convince your parents that, right? And I'll say I would have never been able to convince my parents like, oh, mom and dad, I want to go into music, right? Uh, but I think the fact is that if it really meant that much to me, if music was really something I wanted to pursue, I would have personally been able to fight for it enough to convince them. You know, so I guess for the people who are listening to this, if you're wondering like, how do I go and convince I know I want to do this, I know it's what I want to do. How to convince my parents? Well, the truth is that you can still pursue what you want to do during college, just maybe on the side, right? If music was something I seriously wanted to do, but my parents just weren't budging, I could have still be doing a degree in biomedical engineering, but take music classes or post YouTube videos on the side. Some way, somehow, there's always a possibility. Again, it goes back to what I said. The goal of college isn't for you to become an expert in this field. It's for you to show employers that for 4 years you showed up and you did your thing. So the same way you can do your thing in one field, but you can still do other stuff on the side to build up that interest.
Wow, that's a very well-rounded answer. And yeah, like that is it for the questions that I have. And do you have anything else that you want to bring up on this podcast?
Yeah, I guess I'd say, I'd imagine a lot of people who are listening to this are probably applying for college this cycle, or maybe getting ready to apply for college. It's an intimidating process, right? But one of the mantras I've always had, kind of when I was when I had music auditions, whenever I was getting ready for, I had to debate in high school. Whenever I was getting ready for a big debate tournament, it's when you can turn that nervousness into excitement. That's really where your best work is done. So this entire process is going to take months or at the very least weeks. And so if you're just nervous and petrified that entire time, it's only going to hurt you, right? So turn that nervousness into excitement. Be excited to present your story to an admissions officer. For me, right, I talked about this maybe this podcast where I was obsessed with the admissions process. I was obsessed with the way that colleges and universities work. And so when I knew that, I became excited to be like, oh, I wonder what my spike is going to be, or like, oh, I really want to know what my admissions officer is going to think about this essay that I'm writing. So just be excited about it. And I think, not only will that help you have a better application, it'll also help your mental health, help you just be more live during the process, not too burnt out after. And naturally, I'm sure you guys are able to find me online or whatever. If there's any way that I can help, I'm always happy to help. And yeah, continue to follow the podcast for great episodes.
Thank you. And yeah, I think that wraps up our episode for this time. Thank you, Mr. LaShore, for being on this channel, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.